Hi everyone, Mike here with MEG Motors. Today we're going to be looking at this 2012 RMZ250. The owner brought it in to have the fork seals replaced. They're leaking pretty badly. He asked me to do a walk around and see if I see anything else that needs attention. So we're going to do some checks like I would typically do if I was looking at a dirt bike to buy, and see if we can find any other issues with this bike that might need to be addressed while it's here in the shop. So let me change the camera setup and we'll get started. Okay, so let's get started taking a look at this bike. Obviously the first thing we need to look at is the front fork seals. This is why this bike came in. You can see that they're coated with oil here, so this is a sure sign that they're leaking. If you're looking at a used bike to buy, sometimes owner who might not be quite as honest as he should be will clean the forks off, try to hide the fact that they're leaking. I always like to look down here around the base of the fork, this groove down here. It's harder to get that clean, and so if you see a bunch of oil pooled up down here, or the bottom of the fork leg is covered in oily dirt, that's a good sign that the fork seals are leaking and need to be checked. Another thing I like to look at while I'm up here at the front of the bike is the front brakes. It can be a little bit hard to tell on the camera, so I'm hoping this is going to come out. I'm going to use a flashlight and see if we can get in there. There's the front brake pads. Down here we can see, hopefully this is coming out on the camera, you can see the backing material, the metal backing plate right here, and then the friction material down in there. These front brake pads are probably 50% or more worn, so not totally end of life yet, but while we have it apart, I've talked to the owner already and he wants me to go ahead and put a set of front brake pads on it. So we'll do that while we have the front end apart working on the fork seals. All right, another thing I like to check while we have the bike up on the stand, check the steering bearings. It is difficult to check the steering bearings if the bike is on the ground with the weight of the motorcycle on the front wheel. So it's better to get it up on a stand like I have this one. And so we want to turn the handlebars back and forth and kind of feel the movement. The handlebars should turn very smoothly and very easily. If they are notchy or feel gritty or put up very much resistance at all, it's a good sign that the steering bearings are probably bad and need to be replaced. These feel really, really good, so I don't think we have any issues there. I did notice when I was looking over the bike that the hot start lever is missing. Should be right here, should be a little lever there for the hot start. So we're going to look around and see if we can come up with a hot start lever, get that put back on the bike. And while we're on the subject of leaking suspension components, while leaking front fork seals are a pretty common problem, it's rarer, but something that still needs to be checked is to see if the rear shock is leaking as well. Like I said, it's much rarer. It's also, in my opinion, more difficult to fix. Not that it's not doable, but more work, I think, and like I said, a much less common problem. Look at the condition of the bottoming bumper down there. See if it's falling apart. This one's showing a little bit of wear, but not too bad. The shock doesn't seem to be leaking, so I don't think we need any service there. Another really common issue that we see with used dirt bikes is a worn and stretched chain. When I looked at this bike originally, I could see the chain was very loose. You can see this chain is very, very loose. A loose chain by itself is not necessarily a problem. You can put on a brand new chain, leave it loose, and it's not a problem. It'll slap around, make some noise, but not necessarily a problem. The test that I like to use to see if a chain is actually ready for replacement is to come down here to the back sprocket and grab the chain at about the middle of the rear sprocket and pull it away from the sprocket. And we're looking to see how much of a tooth we can expose. And if we can see more than about a half a tooth, it's a good sign that the chain needs to be replaced. So we grab this chain and we pull it rearward, and bang, we can see an entire tooth there. So this chain is definitely ready for replacement. I also noticed, like right here, we got a broken tooth. You can see these teeth are getting fairly sharp. That's all signs that the chain and sprockets are worn. It's always a good idea to replace both the chain and the sprockets at the same time. And so we'll talk to the owner about that. Chain and sprockets, quality set, you're probably looking at about $150 in parts. So we'll talk to the owner about that. While I was down here, I also noticed that somebody has coated the countershaft sprocket with some blue silicone. I'm not sure why they did that, but I suspect that it was leaking oil. There are a couple of O-rings on the spacer that's behind the sprocket that stop oil from coming out around the splines of this shaft. And if those O-rings fail, you'll get an oil leak out through the splines on the countershaft. I suspect that's what happened, and the owner's or some previous owner has attempted to fix that by filling it with silicone. So we'll see what is going on back there when we get the sprocket and chains, the chain and sprockets off of this bike, and see if we can figure out why that was done, and probably end up replacing those seals. So while I'm back here at the back of the bike, I'll also look at the rear brakes, kind of like we did the front brakes. You can see here, much easier to see on this one, you can see the metal backing plate and the friction material, and there's plenty of material left on these pads, so I don't think the rear brakes need any attention, not this time. Also, while I'm back here, I like to grab the back wheel and pull it side to side and see if I can detect any movement. And on this bike, I can actually feel a little bit of movement. I don't know if you can hear that in the camera, but there's a tiny bit of movement in the wheel. It's not very bad, but there is some movement, and sometimes it can be difficult to tell if the movement is the wheel bearings, which would be right down in here, or if it's the swing arm bearings, which are up here. I did some looking around on this off camera, and I believe that it's the wheel bearings. If I grab the suspension itself, the swing arm, and do the same test, I can't feel any movement. I only feel the movement when I grab the wheel. So I'm pretty sure that we have wheel bearings that are not completely failed at this point, but they're on the way. So we'll talk to the owner about maybe putting in some rear wheel bearings on this one. Also, while I'm walking around the bike, I like to look for anything that's cable operated and pull it through and make sure that the cables are working smoothly and easily. For instance, the clutch here moves smoothly and easily and snaps back like it should, so I think that's good. Same thing with the throttle. You want a smooth throttle, and it should definitely snap back when you let go. If the throttle hangs in the open position, it can obviously be bad if you're riding, so want to make sure we have good smooth cables there, and this one feels good, so I don't see any issues there at all. I also like to take a look underneath the bike and see if I see any oil leaks or water leaks. Looking under this one, everything looks pretty dry. Yeah, I don't see any issues there at all. Look up around the valve cover, head gasket. Everything looks really clean and dry. So while the bike is up on the stand, it's a good idea to grab the front wheel and try to pull it back and forth and see if you can feel any movement or play in the steering bearings here as well. And I actually can feel some slop in here, so we're going to have to look at that a little closer. It could just be that the steering bearings have come loose, which is not unheard of for sure. So we'll check and see if they're loose and tighten them up a little bit, and then rerun our swing test on the steering bearings to see if we feel any roughness once they're tightened back up. Sometimes if steering bearings start to give people trouble, they'll loosen them up a little bit to try to solve the problem temporarily, and that's not really the right way to fix it. But so we'll take a look and see what we see, figure out why we got some play. All right, so now that we have the bike off the stand, we're going to do a couple more tests on the suspension. We're going to grab the front brake and compress the front forks, and we're looking to see that they compress smoothly and rebound smoothly back to about their original position. I don't want to feel any sticking or binding or any funny noises or anything coming out of the front fork. So here we go, and grab the front brake. A couple of quick pushes, everything feels good. It's compressing smoothly, rebounding back where it should. So I don't see any issues there. We're going to do a similar test on the rear suspension. If it's set up properly, there should be some static sag in the bike. We're going to lift the back end to take that static sag out. And when we let go, we expect to see the bike settle back down to its original position. We're going to do the same thing with some compression. We're going to push it down and see if it rebounds smoothly. So here we go. We're going to take out the static sag, let it go. Yeah, it seems to be moving smoothly. Same thing with compression. So yeah, everything feels smooth there as well. If we had issues back here, it would typically mean either linkage bearings or swing arm bearings, or potentially both. And parts alone for that are probably $175, and it's a fair bit of work to replace them. A lot of bearings in there have to be pressed out and pressed in, so it's a good thing we don't have that issue on this one. So that's basically it for the walk around. We found a few problems with this bike, a few things need to be looked at, but nothing catastrophic. Other than that, when I'm looking at a bike to buy, I'll just look at the general condition of the bike. Things like grips that are worn out, levers are bent, plastics, spokes broken or missing, plastics torn up. I see we have one bolt missing on this bike, but it's broke off in the frame, so it must have seized. Not the end of the world. If you find a bike that's in generally poor condition, tires are worn out, spokes are broken, that kind of stuff, it suggests a general lack of maintenance, and you want to consider that when you're thinking about buying a bike. If they don't take care of those issues, there's a good chance that air filters weren't clean and oil wasn't changed as often as it should have been, and so you have to factor all of that in when you make an offer on a bike and negotiate the price and what you're willing to pay for it. So anyway, that's that, and let's get started on some repairs.